Welcome to the Korean Billionaire Love Stories. The channel will bring you stories of strong bonds, cultural differences, passionate love, and unforgettable dramatic events. If you love interracial love stories and cinematic storytelling, then this is the place for you. Enjoy listening. Please subscribe to the channel to hear more great stories.
My boss told me to watch The Journalist. He never said anything about falling in love with her. The first time I saw Ava Johnson, she was standing outside a small apartment building in Koreatown with a notebook in her hand and a camera hanging from her shoulder. It was almost midnight, and the street was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic moving along Wilshire Boulevard. From the rooftop across the street, I watched her through a pair of binoculars, recording every movement the way I had been trained to do. Ava Johnson, investigative journalist, 32 years old, works for an independent news outlet that had recently started asking questions about shipping companies connected to Korean-owned businesses in Los Angeles. Businesses that belong to my boss, Lee Tae-sung. Most people in the city knew Tae-sung as a successful entrepreneur. Electronics imports, logistics companies, real estate investments stretching from downtown to the port of Long Beach. On paper, he looked like another wealthy businessman who had built his fortune through smart deals and long hours. But the men who worked for him knew the truth. Behind those companies was a network that moved illegal electronics, military-grade processors, and restricted communication hardware through the port every month. Shipments arrived from overseas and disappeared into warehouses before customs inspectors even finished their paperwork. Millions of dollars passed through those routes every year. And Ava Johnson was getting too close. 3 weeks earlier, Tae-sung had called me into his office. His building overlooked the city skyline, a glass tower that made him look like a man who had nothing to hide. When I entered the room, he was standing near the window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the traffic far below. He did not turn around when he spoke. "There is a journalist asking questions about my companies," he said calmly. I waited. "She is intelligent," he continued. "Persistent. The kind of person who does not stop once she starts digging." He finally turned and slid a thin folder across the desk toward me. Inside were photographs of Ava Johnson. My assignment sounded simple. Watch her. Follow her. Report everything she learns. "Do not threaten her," Tae-sung said. "Do not scare her." I looked up from the photographs. "Why not?" A faint smile crossed his face. "Because frightened people attract attention." So I started watching her. From rooftops, from parked cars across the street, from quiet corners inside cafes where she interviewed frightened dock workers and warehouse managers who suddenly remembered important details once she asked the right questions. The more I observed her, the more I understood why Tae-sung had noticed her. She worked harder than anyone I had followed before. 16-hour days, cold coffee, instant noodles eaten at her desk, while typing reports late into the night. Sometimes she fell asleep in the newsroom with documents still spread across the table, but she never stopped asking questions. 2 nights ago, I overheard something that changed everything. Ava was speaking with her editor on the phone outside the office building. She told him the investigation was almost finished. She had evidence connecting several shipping companies directly to Tae-sung's operations at the port. If the story went public, the authorities would start looking very closely at my boss. Tonight, just before I left for the rooftop, Tae-sung called me again. His voice sounded colder than usual. "If she publishes the story," he said quietly, "eliminate the problem." That was when I realized something. I had not been assigned to watch Ava Johnson. I had been assigned to decide when she should die. Before I started working for Lee Tae-sung, I lived a very different life. I was a soldier in the Republic of Korea Special Warfare Command, trained to move silently, observe carefully, and make decisions that most people would never want to face. In that world, the rules were simple. Follow the mission. Protect your unit. Survive. When my service ended, I thought I would leave that life behind. Instead, I walked into another battlefield, just one without uniforms. I met Tae-sung through a man who owed him money. That was how most people met him. Debts had a way of introducing strangers to powerful men. The man had heard about my military background and suggested I could be useful as security. At the time, I needed work, and Tae-sung needed someone who understood discipline and silence. The arrangement worked well for both of us. At first, my job was simple. I escorted him to meetings, watched entrances, checked rooms before he arrived. Over time, my responsibilities expanded. Tae-sung trusted very few people, but he respected loyalty. Once he decided you were reliable, he gave you more authority than most bosses would dare. Eventually, I became the man he sent when problems appeared. Problems could mean many things in his world. A shipment that disappeared. A partner who forgot his obligations. A competitor who needed to be reminded about boundaries. I was good at solving those problems. But Ava Johnson was not supposed to become one of them. The first weeks of surveillance were routine. Every morning, she arrived at the newsroom around 8. The building was an aging concrete structure tucked between 2 apartment blocks in downtown Los Angeles. From the outside, it looked like any struggling media office trying to survive in a city that no longer valued print journalism. Inside, however, Ava worked with a level of determination that reminded me of young officers I had trained with years earlier. She studied shipping records for hours without looking up from her screen. When the office emptied in the evening, she often stayed behind, cross-checking numbers and company registrations late into the night. Sometimes she visited the port after midnight, speaking quietly with dock workers who preferred talking when fewer supervisors were watching. I followed her everywhere, from the rooftop across the street when she arrived at work, from a parked sedan 2 blocks away when she met sources for lunch, from the shadow of a stairwell when she interviewed warehouse guards outside the industrial district near Long Beach. Watching people becomes easier with practice. Eventually, you start to notice patterns in their behavior, the way a teacher notices which students understand a lesson before the rest of class. Ava had patterns too. She always carried 2 notebooks, one for interviews and one for her personal observations. She drank too much coffee and rarely finished her meals. When she concentrated on something important, she rubbed the corner of her left eyebrow with her thumb without realizing it. One evening, I followed her to a modest apartment complex near the edge of Koreatown. She climbed the stairs slowly, balancing a grocery bag in one arm while searching for her keys. When the door opened, an older woman greeted her from inside with a tired smile. Ava's mother, according to the file Tae-sung had given me. The woman was ill. I could see it in the way she moved carefully through the room while Ava helped her sit down at the kitchen table. That moment stayed in my mind longer than it should have. Criminal organizations teach you to divide the world into categories. Allies, enemies, strangers. It is easier to operate that way. But real life does not always follow those lines. Watching Ava help her mother with dinner did not look like the behavior of someone who deserved to become a target. Still, my job was not to judge people. My job was to report. Every few days, I updated Tae-sung about Ava's progress. Each report became more detailed than the last. She had traced several shipping containers from a Hong Kong logistics company to one of Tae-sung's warehouses near the port. She had interviewed 2 former employees who confirmed those shipments contained more than simple electronics. She had even obtained partial financial records connecting one of Tae-sung's shell companies to offshore accounts. Her investigation was moving faster than anyone expected. One afternoon, I noticed something new. 2 of Tae-sung's younger men were following her. They were not subtle about it. One waited outside the newsroom while the other circled the block repeatedly in a black SUV. Neither of them had the patience required for proper surveillance. They were there to intimidate her, not observe her. I watched from across the street as Ava walked past them without changing her pace. She knew they were there. Anyone paying attention would have noticed, yet she did not appear frightened. Instead, she continued toward the subway entrance with the calm determination of someone who had already accepted the risks of her work. That was when I understood something important. Tae-sung had ordered me to watch her, but other people in the organization were already preparing for something far more permanent. 3 nights later, the situation changed again. Ava left the newsroom later than usual. The streets were nearly empty as she crossed the parking lot toward her car. I remained on my motorcycle at the far end of the block, helmet visor lowered, pretending to adjust the engine. Then I noticed another vehicle, turning slowly into the lot behind her. The headlights switched off before the car stopped. 3 men stepped out. None of them worked for Tae-sung. I knew every face in his organization. These men belonged to someone else, and they were carrying weapons. The parking lot was almost empty, lit only by 2 flickering street lamps and the faint glow spilling from the newsroom windows above. Ava had just unlocked her car when the second vehicle rolled to a stop behind her. I saw the doors open. 3 men stepped out slowly, their movements calm in the way people move when they believe the situation is already under control. None of them belonged to Tae-sung. That was the first thing I checked. Faces are like fingerprints in our world. If you work long enough in organized crime, you memorize them without trying. These men were unfamiliar. That meant one thing. Someone else had decided Ava Johnson was a problem, a rival group, or someone who wanted Tae-sung blamed for her death. Either way, if they succeeded tonight, everything would spiral out of control. Ava was halfway inside her car when the first man called out to her, "Miss Johnson." She froze. The voice was calm, but carried enough authority to make anyone stop and turn around. Ava slowly stepped back out of the vehicle, one hand still holding the door. "What do you want?" she asked. The 3 men approached her carefully, spreading out in a loose triangle that blocked the exit from the parking lot. The tallest of them kept one hand inside his jacket. I did not need to see the weapon to know it was there. From across the lot, I could hear only fragments of their conversation. Questions about her investigation, warnings about stories that could ruin lives. Ava answered them without raising her voice. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in her shoulders, but she did not step backward. She stood her ground. The man with his hand inside the jacket spoke again, louder this time. "You should stop asking questions about Lee Tae-sung." There it was. They wanted her to disappear quietly, but they wanted Tae-sung's name attached to the warning. If she died tonight, every journalist in the city would assume my boss had silenced her. A perfect setup. The tall man finally pulled the gun halfway from his jacket. That was the moment I started moving. My motorcycle engine roared to life before the men could react. The sound echoed through the parking structure as I accelerated across the lot. One of them turned immediately, raising his weapon toward me. But surprise is a powerful weapon on its own. I slammed the bike sideways between them and Ava, forcing the first man to step back or be knocked off his feet. The second man swung toward me with the gun, but I was already moving. Years of training take over in moments like that. There is no thinking, only motion. My hand grabbed his wrist before he could aim properly. I twisted hard and drove my elbow into his ribs. The gun clattered across the pavement as he collapsed against the side of Ava's car. The third attacker rushed forward from behind me. I heard his footsteps and turned just in time to block the strike aimed at my neck. His fist connected with my shoulder instead, sending a sharp pulse of pain down my arm. I responded with a quick strike to his throat. Not enough to kill him, but enough to steal the air from his lungs. The tall man recovered quickly. He drew a second weapon from his ankle holster and raised it toward Ava. I moved faster. The distance between us closed in 2 steps. My hand caught his wrist, forcing the gun upward, just as he pulled the trigger. The shot cracked loudly through the empty parking lot, shattering a light fixture above our heads. For a second, everything froze. Then the man realized the situation had turned against him. "Move!" he shouted to the others. The 2 surviving attackers scrambled toward their car. Within seconds, the engine roared and the vehicle sped out of the lot, tires screaming against the asphalt as they disappeared into the street. Silence returned just as quickly. The smell of gunpowder hung in the air. Ava was standing exactly where she had been when the fight started, her eyes wide but steady. She looked from the shattered light fixture above us to the man groaning beside the car, and finally to me. "Who are you?" she asked. I removed my helmet slowly. For the first time since I started following her, she saw my face clearly. "Wrong place," I said calmly. "Wrong people." She studied me carefully, as if trying to memorize every detail. "You saved my life." I did not answer. Instead, I walked over to the dropped weapon and kicked it farther under the car where no one could reach it easily. The wounded man on the ground was already trying to crawl away. He would survive. That was enough. Ava stepped closer. "You were here before they arrived," she said. It was not a question. Her eyes moved toward the motorcycle, then toward the rooftop of the building across the street. "You've been watching me." I kept my voice neutral. "You should go home." "Why?" "Because next time," I said quietly, "the people who come after you might not run away." She crossed her arms, studying me with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. And what about you? She asked. What about me? You just stopped them. For a moment, I considered lying. Instead, I gave the only answer that made sense. I was passing by. She did not believe that, for a second. I could see it in the small smile forming at the corner of her mouth. So, you are the mysterious guardian angel following me around the city, she said softly. I turned toward my motorcycle. You are imagining things. Behind me, she spoke again. No, Ava said. Her voice was calm now. I think you are the one keeping me alive. After the fight in the parking lot, Ava Johnson did not leave my mind the way other assignments usually did. Most surveillance targets disappear from memory once the job is finished. They become reports, files, and quiet updates delivered to a boss who only cares about results. Ava was different. That night, she had looked at me not with fear, but with recognition, as if she had already accepted the idea that someone had been watching over her for a long time. For the next several days, I continued my assignment exactly as before. I followed her from a distance. I documented her meetings. I reported every new lead she uncovered about Taesung's network. From the outside, nothing had changed. But internally, the situation was shifting in ways that could not be undone. Ava knew someone was protecting her, and people like Ava Johnson did not ignore mysteries. 2 nights after the attack, she left the newsroom earlier than usual. Instead of driving home, she walked toward a quiet cafe 2 blocks away. I remained across the street, leaning against my motorcycle, pretending to check messages on my phone. The cafe lights reflected across the windows, but I could still see her clearly inside. She was not working. She was waiting. 30 minutes passed before she finally stood up and walked outside. Instead of heading to her car, she crossed the street directly toward me. I had expected this moment eventually. Still, when she stopped in front of me, the calm determination in her eyes made the conversation feel heavier than I had anticipated. You are terrible at hiding, she said. I am not hiding. She folded her arms. You were outside the parking lot that night before those men arrived. You were watching the newsroom the week before that. And yesterday, I saw the same motorcycle near the port. Her observation skills were better than most police investigators I had dealt with. You should not pay attention to strangers, I said. That is literally my job. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Cars passed behind her, headlights briefly illuminating the sidewalk before fading into the distance. Who are you? She asked again. A person who was nearby when you needed help. She shook her head slowly. No, she said. You were there before I needed help. Her eyes studied my face carefully. You work for them. I did not respond. That is the only explanation, she continued. You know the people I am investigating. Still I said nothing. Ava stepped closer. So why are you helping me? The question hung between us in the cool evening air. Finally I answered. Because if you keep digging, I said quietly, they will kill you. Instead of fear, something else appeared in her expression. Determination. Then maybe people should know the truth before that happens. You should stop. Why? Because you are standing in the middle of a war you do not understand. She let out a short laugh. I understand more than you think. That was probably true, but understanding danger and surviving it were 2 very different things. While we were speaking, the larger problem was already unfolding elsewhere. Inside Taesung's organization, questions were beginning to appear. The attack on Ava Johnson had not been authorized by Taesung. When one of his lieutenants heard rumors about it, he reported the incident immediately. Taesung did not like surprises. In our world, unexpected violence often meant someone had lost control. Within a day, he began reviewing every report connected to Ava's investigation, including mine. My reports had always been precise, accurate timelines, clear summaries of her activities, but there was one detail that had started to change recently. She was still alive. That fact alone was beginning to look suspicious. 3 nights after the attack, Taesung summoned me to his office. The same glass tower, the same quiet room overlooking the city lights. When I entered, he was standing by the window, just as he had been the first day he gave me the assignment. You have been watching the journalist for weeks, he said without turning around. Yes. She continues to investigate my companies. Yes, and yet nothing has stopped her. His voice was calm, but the meaning behind the words was clear. Finally, he turned to face me. Why? I held his gaze. She is cautious. That has never stopped you before. Silence filled the room. Taesung studied my expression carefully. He had built his entire empire by reading people faster than they could read him. Lying to a man like that was never easy. You are protecting her, he said quietly. It was not a question. For several seconds, I considered denying it. Instead, I remained silent. Taesung exhaled slowly. I trusted you, he said. You still can. That depends. He walked back to the desk and rested both hands on its surface. Tell me something honestly, he continued. Are you protecting her because she is useful to us or because you care about her? I did not answer. That silence told him everything he needed to know. When I left his office that night, I understood something with absolute clarity. If I remained inside Taesung's organization, Ava Johnson would eventually die. The only question left was how long it would take. An hour later, I parked my motorcycle outside the newsroom again. Ava was still inside, working under the soft glow of her desk lamp. Papers covered the table. Shipping records, financial statements, evidence that would bring the entire organization crashing down if it ever reached the public. She looked up when I entered the building. You again, she said. Yes. You should not be here. I know. I walked closer and placed a small envelope on her desk. What is this? Proof, I said. Her eyes widened slightly as she opened it. Inside were copies of financial transfers and warehouse records connecting Taesung's network to offshore accounts. Why are you giving this to me? She asked. I looked directly at her. Because you need to disappear tonight. When I told Ava she needed to disappear that night, she stared at me as if I had just rewritten the rules of her entire life. The newsroom around us was quiet except for the low hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic outside the building. For a moment, she said nothing, simply holding the envelope of documents in both hands while reading the names printed across the pages. These are real, she said finally. Yes. Her eyes lifted from the papers to my face. You just handed me the evidence that could destroy your own boss. Yes. She closed the folder slowly, her expression shifting from shock to something closer to understanding. And if I publish this, they will kill you. The answer was simple, because the truth usually is. Ava leaned back in her chair, studying me the way journalists study every important detail before writing the final sentence of a story. I had asked myself that question many times during the past week. Loyalty had shaped most of my adult life. Loyalty to a unit. Loyalty to a commander. Loyalty to a man who had trusted me when I needed work and purpose. But watching Ava fight for the truth had forced me to see something I had ignored for years. Loyalty means nothing if it protects the wrong side. Because someone needs to stand where the truth is, I said. She remained silent for several seconds before standing up and walking to the window. The city lights spread across the night skyline, glowing like distant stars beyond the glass. Finally, she turned back toward me. If I disappear tonight, this story still needs to be told. It will be. How? You already did the hard part, I replied. You found the truth. A month later, the article was published. Ava's investigation appeared across every major news site in the country. Financial transfers, shell companies, shipping routes that connected Lee Taesung's empire to a network of illegal operations stretching across the Pacific. The investigation that followed moved quickly once the authorities had proof. Lee Taesung disappeared from public view within days. The organization he built began collapsing soon after. Ava and I never returned to Los Angeles the same way again. Some stories change the people who write them. Some stories change the people who try to stop them. I was sent to watch her. I never expected she would be the one who showed me where I actually belonged. In the end, the strangest part of the story is not the violence, the betrayal, or the Mafia empire that collapsed. It is the fact that everything changed because one person refused to stop searching for the truth. Ava thought she was just exposing corruption, but in doing so, she changed 2 lives. Mine, and everyone who believed men like Taesung could never be challenged. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon in the world is not a gun or a knife. It is courage. The courage to ask questions, even when powerful people want silence. If this story kept you listening until the end, take a moment to support the channel. Like this video, subscribe for more powerful drama stories, and tell me what you think in the comments. Did he make the right choice by betraying his boss to protect Ava and the truth? Or should loyalty always come first? I read every comment, and your opinion might inspire the next story.